Hello, and welcome back to the Book Marketing Tips and Author Success Podcast. This is Penny Sansevieri and Amy Cornell. I'm very excited about today's show. I mean, I know I say that a lot, but I'm really excited about today's show because I feel like elevator pitches are not talked about enough in the industry. I mean, Amy, would you agree?
Yeah, I think they're really misunderstood. I think the word or the phrase gets thrown around and it kind of gets smashed into all the other kind of content and promotional language you have to create. And it doesn't get enough of attention on its own for how important it is.
Exactly. And I also think that elevator pitches, and we actually saw this so we asked on social media and we asked to our newsletter peeps to send in their elevator pitches so that we could vet them on this show. And we're absolutely going to do that. But there were several of them, more than I actually expected, that showed up that were just paragraphs and paragraphs long. And I was a little surprised by that. How about you?
Yeah. And I mean, I think that kind of, it worked out perfectly. Believe it or not, we didn't plan it this way, everybody listening, but it actually plays into a lot of what we address on the show about what typically goes wrong, how to fix it, what to look out for, and why this is kind of a misunderstood / missed opportunity for a lot of authors.
Absolutely. And I think we're going to start to dig into some of the tips because creating an elevator pitch for your book is a 1 to 2 sentence blurb. Literally, the term elevator pitch is an old Hollywood term where you get stuck in the elevator with an executive at whatever, CBS or Netflix or something. What are you going to say before this, individual hits their floor that's going to entice them to ask you more about the book? Some of the elevator pitches that were 2 paragraphs long, I would hope that whoever the Netflix producer was zooming up 100 floors, because that's pretty much how long it's going to take you to get them, to get them interested. And the other piece of it too is that you really don't have a lot of time to get people's attention, right? So if you're not absolutely killing it in the first 2 lines, which I know, no pressure, you've potentially lost your audience. So let's talk first about the most basic, where your elevator pitch work needs to start, what your book is about. And ironically, this is often where authors get lost. And the reason for that is because when somebody asks you what your book is about, you a lot of times ramble. I wanted to find a really nice way to say it. And a lot of this, and I see this a lot at in-person writers' conferences, right, is that you aren't prepared. Somebody asks you what your book's about and you're like, oh, you kind of fumble and you're like, oh, I spent 25 years working on this book and how am I going to distill it down to, whatever. But the other piece of it is that and this is in particular for fiction authors, but we are going to cover nonfiction in this show as well. In particular for fiction authors, fiction authors are sort of conditioned, obviously. You want to save the climax for the end of the book. You save the best for last. That's kind of what you do. But I really recommend, this is a really fun acronym, BLUF, bottom line up front. It's actually an Army term, which Amy's family is in the Army, so she may disagree with the bottom line up front piece. But the reader really wants to know what the benefits are, what the story arc is. You have to pull them into the story with the first 2, the story or the benefits of the book, if you've written nonfiction, with the first 2 sentences.
Absolutely. And, this is not poetry, right?
Right.
You want to be clever and intriguing, but you really have to make it quick, as if saying 1 to 2 sentences didn't already imply that. But it's not just the length, it's what you communicate in that amount of time as well. Don't use 6 words when you can use 2 words, So for example, starting with something like, this is a story about, you're already going off the rails and you've wasted, half of your space just getting to the good stuff.
Right. That's a very, very good point. And as you're listening to this podcast, and I hope that you listen to it a few times, not because we're awesome, but because as you go through this, I would really like you, if you're listening, just pause the show at this point and start to just write down your elevator pitch. And your elevator pitch could be 2 paragraphs. That's absolutely what you're probably going to start with. And then through this show, hopefully we'll show you how to whittle it down, because the next piece is give them some context. So what's the setting or the heart of what your book is about? And Amy, shed some light on that a little bit.
Yeah. And I think by setting, we need to be clear. We're not necessarily talking about the location. It's not quite as literal as that. I mean, I suppose it could be depending on your book, but really we're talking about the primary purpose, the anchor, so this can be the thrilling element if you write suspense fiction, or that kind of heart-wrenching, relatable element for romance, or the problem you're trying to solve. For nonfiction, your elevator pitch really needs to reflect your genre or your topic without question, I believe, as well. Your elevator pitch should tell somebody or give them a very good idea of what genre your book lands in without having to actually tell them.
Exactly. Because if you finish your elevator pitch and somebody asks you what genre is it a thriller? Then your elevator pitch is probably not very good. One of the best ways, though, to learn how to write elevator pitches is to edit someone else's. And I discovered this when I was teaching an elevator pitch class. And I did this, it was like an all-day class. And we had, 15 people. It was really, really fun. But we're so close to our own stuff that one of the things that I had the authors do in this class is swap elevator pitches and start editing somebody else's. And nobody knew who had edited the pitch, but they, we stacked them and then they got them back, and they were much improved because we are too close to our own stuff. It's hard, but it's pretty easy to look at somebody else's elevator pitch and know what's right, what's not right, or what doesn't speak to you. And often when you edit those, you'll also start to get a sense of what we mean by having words in there that you don't need. Let's take a look at one. And I don't even really know what book this is. I stumbled on this online and I thought, I think this elevator pitch could use a little bit of work. So if the author's listening, you're welcome. Here's how that showed up on Amazon. It's the story of how an Orange County housewife spent 4 years searching for her mother's murderer when law enforcement officials both in Mexico and the US gave up. I don't think that's necessarily bad, but what I would suggest is something along the lines of, and Amy, you may even have a suggestion on how this can be further improved. When law enforcement officials give up the search for her mother's murderer, an Orange County housewife spends 4 years searching both sides of the border for her mother's killer.
Yeah, I think the second option, the flow is so much better for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's kind of a double up there with mother's murderer, mother's killer, using one and even cramming in a little bit more intrigue or tension or something like that. But again, these things take time.
Yeah.
The fact that, you pulled this together for a show today, Penny, is like already how much improvement you made, just to use an example, is amazing. Because typically, honestly, when we work with authors on copy, we don't do it a lot, but every once in a while it's appropriate. It takes some time,
It does.
And I think in the original, the specific mention of Mexico really kind of caught me off guard.
Yeah.
And I think that happens a lot with less successful elevator pitches and even full book descriptions. I see this a lot when we work with our clients on refining their book descriptions. Sometimes specific details can create more confusion.
Yes.
And once you confuse someone a little bit, or you trigger their brain to get pulled into something unrelated to like just falling in love with your book, you've lost that sale. So that mention of randomly throwing Mexico in there. Yes, it happened in Mexico. Does it need to be said? Because now I'm sitting here going like, wait, well, what happened in Mexico? You know what I mean? It's just, there's a lot, again, it takes a long time and it should be fun, but it does take some time to workshop these and really get something that flows well, that doesn't make people confused, that doesn't give them too much information, but gives them just the right amount for them to go, well, I need to read the book because I need to figure out what happened,
Exactly. And the other piece of it too is that you could drop the Orange County housewife. So if I were pitching this book to Orange County, I would mention the Orange County housewife. But if I wasn't, the Orange County housewife, because it could be Orange County, New Jersey, it could be Orange County, Los Angeles, Southern California. That also so what you want to avoid when you're creating elevator pitches is you want to avoid opportunities for the mind to wander. And what Amy pointed out about like Mexico. So Mexico thrown in there, when you stop the listener's experience or reader's experience, if this is on your retail page on Amazon, you've essentially lost a sale. So that's really why you want to focus on the flow. The next piece of this is who cares? And I'm reading this really great.
Sorry. I just love that segue. The next piece is who really gives a shit?
I know. Who cares? Enjoy the show. Thanks for listening.
No, but it's so perfect. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, but I was given an early copy of this book called The Bezos Blueprint, and it's by I'm going to totally blank on the name, but it's up for pre-order. It's a really, really good book. And it's a book about communication. Carmine Gallo, sorry, that's who the author is. And one of the things that he talks about, he has this whole chapter on who cares, right? And that's probably one of the best questions that you can ask yourself, whether you're writing an elevator pitch or an actual pitch, is who cares, right? And again, we're very close to our own topics, right? We're very close to our own books. But one of the exercises in the book is you have to write something and then ask, and then the question pops up in the book, like, who cares? Well, okay, who's really going to care about this? And by doing that, you have to find something that resonates with the reader more than anything else. And we're going to look at some movie log lines in just a minute. But when you are putting your pitch together, when you're putting your elevator pitch together, it has to, at the end of the day, you're not in the equation. You don't really matter to this whole conversation. The only thing that matters is the person that you're appealing to, which is the reader, or if you're very lucky, that executive from Netflix who is going to maybe turn your book into a movie. If you've ever looked at movie log lines, this is a really fun exercise I like to do in class too. It's really, really fun. TV and movie people spend hours reviewing the promotional log lines for whatever it is that's coming out, right? And so let's take a look at a few of them and kind of break them down. The first one, an English combat nurse from 1945 is mysteriously swept back to 1743.
Oh, that's definitely Outlander. So.
Right. So if you're an Outlander fan, you know immediately what that is. But there's something really curious here. So the romance between Claire and Jamie is a big part of the story. In fact, it is the story, but it's not mentioned in the log line. And that is because the reader, in this case, time travel and historical fiction, is less about romance and more about the history. I mean, romance is important, but the history, historical fiction readers, and any historical fiction reader that you ever talk to will tell you the details of the historical fiction absolutely matter. And so that's where they led with. And this is what I mean by writing this down and saying, who cares? Because your reader has to care, and you got to know who your reader is. Amy, do you want to take the next one?
Yeah. And I want to say that was so smart of them too, because yes, like you said, Penny, the actual romance is such a huge part, but in many ways, that is still very one-dimensional. You know what I mean? The romance between two individuals is still only just, it's a kind of a one-dimensional concept. Yeah. Instead, they kind of drop this bomb of this, time period sweeping. There's a mystery to it. And even just saying combat nurse, you know what I mean? That is definitely a throwback. So you've got these great throwback kind of phrases in there too, that immediately suck you into the time period. It was just so smart because there was so much more they could go with from there. And they're pulling in so many other people than strictly diehard romance fans.
Absolutely. And I would say too, Amy, to your point, I think that if they had tried to just go after romance fans, I don't know if the books are phenomenal, but I don't know if they would have done as well, because straight romance readers are different from historical fiction readers, historical
Oh,
romance
yeah.
readers.
Yes. And
Sure.
we both know someone who shall not be named that really enjoyed this series, but she is
Yes.
absolutely not someone that would ever pick up a romance book. So
10,000% she would not pick up a romance book.
yes, so it's a perfect example. Okay.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So if you put her in front of a Hallmark romance movie, she'd probably climb the walls, but she loves all the history. So it's a really good example. All right. So Amy, do you want to take the next one?
Sure. In turn of the century London, a magical nanny employs music and adventure to help two neglected children become closer to their father.
All right. Amy, now as a parent, why does this log line appeal to you?
I will say instantly, I mean, obviously, I know this is what this is too. I'm like, I feel like I'm in a game show right now, and in my head, I'm winning.
You can say the name of the movie.
Okay, it's Mary Poppins. Okay, but it clearly very quickly expresses a level of excitement and wonder. I mean, they worked in the magic, the music, the adventure, and then they still managed to drive it home with that heartwarming element.
Yeah.
And they did all of that in less than 25 words.
Right.
So
Exactly.
It sounds fast paced, but it's also sweet. And it's also, there's a level of unexpected once you throw magic in there and adventure. Mm-hmm. So it just made it very multidimensional in so few words.
Right. Exactly. And I also think that it's worth mentioning some of the elevator pitches that we got submitted to us were very sort of a little bit highbrow in their writing. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. But one of the rules of good communication is writing for an 8th grade education level. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you're sounding like an 8th grader, but that you are.
Does God help us?
Right. But that you are putting together a structure that is not complex to understand. So Amy, you and I talk about this a lot as it relates to like your Amazon book description. Mm-hmm. Save the $5 words when you're trying to impress somebody at a cocktail party, but using, and this is actually another thing that they talk. I'm sorry. I'm like, I sound like I'm a podcast all about this Bezos blueprint book, but it really was very interesting to read back through some of his letters to the board and speeches that he's given, all written to 8th grade education. And there's a widget in Word where if you have, if you've written something, you can actually have Word analyze it and it'll give you a score in terms of how readable it is, which is an interesting trick that I did not know existed. And it's helpful to use that for anything, book descriptions, elevator pitches, all of those. Amy, did you know that was a thing?
I didn't realize that it was I didn't realize what it meant. I have noticed the readability thing pop up, and usually it's when I'm shifting between a lot of documents and I accidentally click on all the things at the bottom and I'm like, no, I don't want to know the word count. Like,
right.
But I have seen it before, but I did not know to the extent that why it was created and the parameters that it used. And that is very interesting.
Well, and it's important if you are whether you're using 25 words, like the Mary Poppins pitch that we just talked about, or whatever pitch that you're writing, if you are going to distill your book into 1 or 2 sentences or 25 word or a long sentence that's 25 words, you really have to get rid of all of the very complex, the superfluous words, the words that kind of stop the reader's experience and ask, wait, what does that mean again? I don't really know what that means. So let's take a look at the final one, which is actually my favorite. After a single career-minded woman is left on her own to give birth to the child of a married man, she finds a new romantic chance in a cab driver.
That's Look Who's Talking. I win, right? I got all three of them.
You win. And I love that movie. And why this is such a great log line is because it is such an excellent example of knowing your audience. Because if you think of that movie, what do you think of?
Bruce Willis. I'm just kidding. I mean, kind of. But seriously, what made it such a unique concept and what is the fact that you're listening to the baby's ongoing monologue through the whole thing, which was just such a new and exciting and fun and entertaining concept.
Right, exactly. But if they had put that on a billboard, so come watch a movie about a kid talking, they knew that, right? They knew that their core audience, which was mothers, young mothers, would be, would say, well, if I want to listen to a kid talk, I can just stay home.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. And so this is why you can't create an elevator pitch in a vacuum.
Mm-hmm.
We say that a lot. Challenge yourself to come up with at least 3 versions of what you think your elevator pitch would be, and really challenge yourself to hit on different elements, to see how things land and the pace and everything like that. And then get feedback from other writers, from people read in your genre. Honestly, getting a book marketing person's take is also really smart too. That's not just a shameless plug, but a lot of people forget that marketing isn't just getting a bunch of work done that you don't have time for. There's so much psychology involved in marketing.
Yeah.
And buyer psychology really cannot be an ignored element of your book's potential success, So really, while it does sound like a shameless plug, there is really so much that we factor in, that goes into any recommendations we make and things like that. So getting somebody's feedback that does have a marketing background, that understands buyer psychology, is also really insightful as well.
Right, exactly. And like Amy said, create a few versions, make them short and sweet, and then edit until, you feel like you're right where you need to be. Now let's take a look, just before we close out the show, let's take a look at a couple of them that we got. So this was actually an elevator pitch. I have 2 elevator pitches. This is actually, I did a coaching call with Holly the other day. Hi, Holly, if you're listening. And she wrote her own elevator pitches, and she wasn't really sure how good they were. And I actually think, especially the first one, is very good. This is the book, The Color of Trauma. And the elevator pitch is: a woman who can experience and remove other people's traumatic memories is coerced into helping a Chicago homicide detective catch a serial killer.
Cool.
Right? Cool, right? Now,
yes.
She could whittle that down. She could whittle out the and remove, like a woman who can experience other people's traumatic memories, because that and remove sort of, it almost stops your, like, what do you mean by remove? Like, is she a brain surgeon? Right.
Mm-hmm.
So edited, that might be: a woman who can experience other people's traumatic memories is coerced into helping a Chicago homicide detective catch a serial killer. Boom.
Yeah.
That is a great elevator pitch.
It's so exciting.
And she did this on her own, which not just saying that just because I did a coaching call with her, but I told her, I said, this was just terrific. So her next one, which is a little bit longer and needs some help: Jolene, a recovering alcoholic with the psychic ability to experience people's memories, helps a secret government agency take down drug syndicates. Now, I don't dislike this, but I don't know, like, you could almost edit out the psychic, you could just add out the psychic part, because I think that's sort of clear from Jolene, a recovering alcoholic. Does recovering alcoholic really need to be in there? Like, these are the kinds of questions that you have to ask yourself. I mean, Amy, what do you think?
I think that's tough. I mean, I guess it depends on, we'll see. And now this is where getting too close to your own work, like how much it really plays into it. I think to some degree, to me, my initial impression is that, like, we're supposed to think she's kind of a shit show. Sorry. Right. I'm not trying to be offensive to people that have gone through recovery, but I think, you know what I mean?
And we've just lost lots of listeners.
I know it.
Thanks, Amy.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I think the reality is that by including that, you are making her vulnerable in some way. You are making her flawed in some way. You are making her less than perfect. You know what I mean? She's not this knight in shining armor fixing all the things necessarily. So it kind of is an interesting juxtaposition to what the pitch claims she ends up getting involved in, which I think is kind of cool. I don't know if it has to be so detailed. I think there are other ways to imply that you have a potentially flawed or struggling main character. So maybe playing around with how you get that across without being so literal, could be an interesting way to approach it.
Would you get rid of the word psychic and just say the ability to experience?
Yeah. And so was this the same book?
This is a different book. This is
okay, but it's the same main character. See, sorry, I don't have this written down.
No, I'm sorry. They're different. They're different main characters.
Okay, so yeah, I don't know. It might just be, I don't know. Sometimes
you could sort of play around with that and see.
Yeah, and I think that goes to show that seeing something in writing too also gives you a sense for your reader's experience.
Right.
So me listening to you tell me about this book, I'm like, ooh, it is still very different than me reading it on my own on a retail page too. And that's another element that makes this so critical, and why the elevator pitch is such a standalone element of your marketing,
Right. Exactly. So we have two more. This book is If No One Is Watching by Ben Sessoms. Determined to become a police officer, 27-year-old Allie tries to hide a horrific secret about her sister's missing husband. But as police uncover evidence about the missing man, she makes a mistake that threatens her life, the relationship with her sister, and any chance of wearing a badge. Okay, that's long. It's a mouthful.
Yeah.
I would get rid of her age. I don't think her age matters here. I think that unless, if she were like 16, like, whoa, she's going to be a young police officer. But I don't think the age matters here. So I would drop that right up front.
We've got the doubling up on information is typically a waste also. So missing husband and then mentioning missing man. I think you already mentioned that her husband's missing. So as police uncover evidence, done with that, move on,
Right. Exactly. And I think I would kill the relationship with her sister. I think I would get rid of that part of it too. I think I would just really, like I said, I would get rid of her age first and foremost. I think we doubled up on information. So as you see, the more that you do this, the better and easier that it becomes. And let's try. Okay. So this is Emma's Dream by Mary Lee Griffin, who we've actually worked with. Hi, Mary Lee, if you're listening. Headed home, Ben Morgan runs into Maggie Williams and his ailing heart skips a beat. Maggie has struggled to forget him, raising her daughter Emma alone. He's gorgeous as ever, and she swears he'll not break her heart again. So this one is interesting because I'm familiar with Mary's books. If I'm just jumping into this and have no history with this series, I really want to know, like, my experience is stopped when you say ailing heart skips a beat. Like, why is it ailing? Like, does he have heart disease? Is his heart broke? You know what I mean? Like, what's going on? Like, was his heart broken? You know what I mean?
It's an extra adjective. That's, I think, a very good point. You have to watch out for those. I think that I would, you might even want to start with Maggie has struggled to forget Ben, right? Until why is Ben headed home? Right. So there's a piece, right? There's a piece of this that's really missing. So Maggie has struggled to forget Ben, and then, raising their daughter Emma alone. Okay. So why is this guy like, so if this guy's an MIA father, like, I'm already like, well, Ben's kind of a loser. Like, why is he not, you know what I mean? Like, why but he's hot, but he's hot.
So he's a hot loser. So you can get away with a lot in romance. So there's a lot of, like, when you say raising their daughter, I think if you're not prepared to explain that in the elevator pitch, or if it's not the heart of the story, like, if Emma, so when you're putting together these elevator pitches, you have to ask yourself, if Emma wasn't part of the story, would there still be a story?
Right.
Yeah. And if not, I'd pull her from the elevator pitch.
Yeah. And I think this is a really great example also of, there's a couple things here. One, I think it's hard for people that are new to your work to follow along when you change up perspectives.
Right.
Because it kind of started where we think this is all from Ben's perspective, and then it kind of switched to Maggie. You know what I mean? So going back and forth is really hard for someone to follow along in such a short amount of time. And then I think there's also an element here that, like you said, Penny, it's kind of hard to explain, but it's like, it's so close. It is so close, but I do think that there's something in the flow of it that could be better,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. I think that there is I think that there's a little bit of, I think that this is too wordy. I think Mary Lee, I think she could lead with a different kind of element. And one of the things that I would suggest is take a look at other sort of similar books. And that's another good exercise, is take a look at other similar books and take a look at what their elevator pitches or log lines are, because that'll really help to give you a sense of, you know what I mean?
I agree.
Where you want to go with this.
And I think one other thing too, and it's a very fine line. And that was the other part that I think I was struggling to find the words for. So thank you for everybody for bearing with me. But I think it's a fine line between setting the scene for your book, like we talked about, but avoiding trying to recap the whole book. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
So I think Mary Lee was trying a little bit too hard to kind of cram together everything that's kind of covered and resolved in this book to some degree.
Yeah.
And it just ended up being a little too much, again, for someone that is brand new to this series, because this is a book that's a part of a whole series. So I think there's that element too, that I give Mary Lee credit for, is that when you've written a whole series and it has some continuity in regards to characters and things like that, it gets even trickier,
Yeah.
with your elevator pitch, like what's enough, what's too much, what makes sense, depending on if the books have to be read in order versus if they could be read as standalones. She's got a lot of other elements to consider when she's writing elevator pitches for individual books in a series. So I think I'm glad that she submitted, because that wasn't something that we originally had, outlined to discuss. But if you have a series, you're in a whole different ball game as well when you're coming up with your elevator pitches for those books.
Right, exactly. And we unfortunately didn't get any nonfiction submissions. Nonfiction, obviously, always tends to be a little bit easier. And obviously I write nonfiction. But the same is definitely true. And nonfiction, I think, is also maybe a little bit more challenging in the whole kind of who cares piece of it, right? So I read a book called Atomic Habits, which I really loved. The header line on Amazon is tiny changes, remarkable results, right? Which, okay, that's a nice headline for the Amazon retail page. But you also have to remember that we are inundated with self-help, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you could say that about pretty much every genre, but self-help in particular is massive. So I think that even for nonfiction folks, you really do have to drill down into how is this book different? And when I get on the phone with authors, when we're talking to them about possibly working together, that's actually one of the first things that I ask them. How is this book different from every other book out there? And 9 times out of 10, authors struggle to answer that question. Mm-hmm. So I think that's something that you really have to, and like Amy said, work with a professional, book some coaching with me. This is not a shameless plug, but it is worth your time, because it can be the difference between making or breaking your book. And I've actually had, so just to close out the show, when I was doing this elevator pitch work with this group, this woman had a book that she had already pitched to an agent, several agents actually, and she got a nose, but she really wanted to persist. So she took the elevator pitch that we all contributed to and we all worked on, because the conference started the next day, and she got a book deal based on an elevator pitch from the same, actually she got 2 offers from the same agents that she had previously pitched, same book, but with a less than stellar elevator pitch. So it absolutely makes a difference. It's absolutely something worth spending your time on.
100%. And like you said, Penny, doing that coaching and doing that kind of self-analysis and that market research is just going to make everything about how you present yourself to your market, the platform, everything that you do will be better for it. It's not just to get these 1 or 2 sentences correct. Like that's one element of it, but it will improve everything that you do.
Yeah, absolutely will. Thank you so much for listening. And thank you for submitting your elevator pitches. I'm sorry that we didn't get to all of them. We did not get to the really long ones because some of them, they were all like 2-3 paragraphs and it was too much to go over during the show. But if you submitted them and you know that they were 2 or 3 paragraphs and you want to redo them down to 1 or 2 sentences, absolutely send them our way and we'll have a look at them.
Yes,
thank you so much. What?
I said, yes, please. I would love that.
I'd love to see them revised based on, and the other thing is Amy's like, oh my gosh, what's she going to say now? If you're listening to this and you're working on your elevator pitch and this show has inspired you to write your elevator pitch, send it our way. I'd love to see what you created. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. This is Penny Sansevieri and my ever awesome co-host, Amy Cornell. And we appreciate you listening. Please do leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Bye-bye.